How's it going, guys? Topic for today's video, I want to briefly touch upon an important subject about building your own tiny house. And should you the viewer, should you build your own tiny house? Because there are a lot of different options in terms of getting a tiny house built. And it's not just like you either have to do it yourself, like the entire thing, or you have to have a company basically build the entire thing yourself and finish off the inside. And I want you to think about what is the best option for you. Now, the first question that I would ask myself, and I'm gonna do another video talking specifically about this, and the question is the tiny house right for me? Is this something that I should be investing my money into? Or is there a better option that's gonna work better for me in the future? Because tiny houses work great for certain people with certain lifestyles, and it's probably not going to work so great with certain people and certain lifestyles. So just definitely keep that in mind and think about that. Is a tiny house on wheels, is this going to be the best option for me? But if you're thinking, yes, I do want to do this, should you build the tiny house yourself? Let me tell you, from basically the trailer up to finishing this tiny house, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of physical labor, obviously, as many of you have seen in my YouTube videos about basically the entire build. It was a lot of work. Mentally, it was also very challenging because I had to do a lot of things, or I had to learn a lot of things that I didn't necessarily know before. And I had to basically trust my gut and my instinct on doing what I thought was going to be best. So you certainly have a number of different options. For me, building this tiny house, I had a lot of favorable circumstances. I was pretty well able to work on this full time. So I was able to spend about 20 to 30 hours per week. I didn't have a lot of financial constraints on the tiny house. We had a budget, a loose budget, but it wasn't like I couldn't progress on the build because we didn't have enough money. We had enough money saved so that I could always keep buying materials and working on it. So those are two favorable circumstances. And it was also really nice that I was able to make videos about it and put it on YouTube. So I also really enjoyed that aspect as well. Now, there's a lot of stories within the tiny house community of people who have built their tiny house entirely themselves while they're still working at a full-time job. So they're still working, 30 or 40 hours a week at a job. And then on top of that, they're also spending their evenings and their weekends building their own tiny house. And now, from the experience that I've had of building the tiny house and knowing how much physical work goes into it, going the route where you're going to be working a full-time job and also building your tiny house on the side, people have done it and people will continue to do it. I'm just going to tell you that it's going to be it's going to be difficult. And I don't want to dissuade you from doing it, but physically, it's going to be difficult, because there's just so much that you have to do. And a lot of people have done it and they're very happy with the results and stuff. But just keep in mind that it's going to take you a lot longer. Typically, people who go that route, they spend at least between 1 to 2 years finishing their tiny house. So it's not a very quick process, whereas you could just pay for a tiny house in full and probably have it in a few weeks. But if you're the kind of person you're like, I'm going to make this happen, I don't really care about what D-Man says. He says it's difficult. I'm going to do it myself regardless, whatever. Then go and do that. Follow that desire. I personally had a really strong desire to not only live in a tiny house, but I really wanted to build it. And that might be different for you. You just might be thinking, I just want to live in a tiny house. I don't really want to get into the building of it. And that's totally cool. I think making that conscious choice of living a more simple, minimalistic life, I think that's great. So I would never be like snobby and be like, oh my God, like you didn't even build your own tiny house. Like, I would never ever say that, because I think it's such a great choice. So another good option that I've heard other people have done with their tiny house builds is they're like, I'm gonna do this myself, but I'm also gonna hire a handyman to help me with some of the more maybe difficult or physically demanding aspects of the tiny house. So for example, the framing and the sheathing or the siding, those are all gonna be physically demanding, and you might not really necessarily have that skill set, or it might be more difficult for you to learn that skill set. I didn't even have the skill set of framing walls. I just kind of went and did it, but it could be very terrifying for a lot of people. And since the walls and the foundation, like basically connecting the subfloor to the trailer, is certainly some of the most important parts of the tiny house in terms of its overall structural integrity, it might be a wise idea to have someone specifically help you with that. I'm sure you could find framers or carpenters to help you out with that aspect. And you might be like, well, I don't want to spend the money. But spending that money on someone helping you with those aspects could certainly save you money over the long run if you do something incorrectly, and it might cost you a lot more money down the road. So another common option that I see is people get the shell of a tiny house built, and then they're allowed to finish off the inside exactly how they want. So basically, when a shell is built, they basically do the subfloor, they do the walls, they do the sheathing, they put in the windows, they put on the roof, they put on the siding. They do a lot of what I would say is the most difficult part of it. The framing and the sheathing specifically, I would say it was quite difficult to do it myself. The roofing, depending on the type of roof that you have, it can be a little bit complicated. And even framing the roof, if you have all these weird different like pitches and stuff, that can be very complicated. And there's been people who actually watch this channel and they've basically done the entire tiny house built themselves. They've had to contract out things like the roof because the plans that they bought created such a odd, well, not an odd roof, a more complicated roof, and they just couldn't even figure it out themselves. So they had to hire somebody to do their roof. So a tiny house shell basically has everything done on the outside. So if you're looking outside in, so you're just looking at the outside of the tiny house, it looks like a finished house. But when you walk on the inside, it's like there's no insulation, there's no electrical done, there's no flooring, there's nothing on the inside other than the studded walls that you can see. And I think for a lot of people, that is gonna be probably one of your best options. Because I would say, if you're like, I really like doing some of the stuff myself, but maybe I don't wanna really do all of it, I think that would be great. And the hardest part of doing a tiny house is all those aspects. So doing the framing, the sheathing, the siding, the roof, the windows, I would say that that's definitely the most, and the door as well. I would say that that is certainly the most complicated, and it can be the most physically demanding as well. So if you just want to focus on the inside, do your own insulation, do your own electrical, do your own plumbing, do your own cabinetry, or like whatever, like all the stuff on the inside, whether you do drywall or you do some type of wood paneling or something like that, that's going to be much more manageable for a lot of people, and it's much easier than starting from basically the trailer and going all the way up. And I think that's a great option. And the last main option that I see is just getting a tiny house built from scratch that a company does, finishes off on the inside, and you really don't have to do anything other than just move in. So I think it's really important to just kind of focus on exactly what your focus is. So are you more interested in the building aspect of it and the living, or are you just more interested in the living in a tiny house aspect? Because if you're not interested in the building aspect of it, then don't do the building aspect of it, because it's just not, it's not going to be enjoyable for you. You might not get the desired result that you want, and it might end up costing you more money over the long run. So buying all the tools that you would need and investing in the education that you'd need to build something like this, I mean, like that's going to take time and money. So you have to figure out whether or not that's going to be worth it for you. Because let me tell you, like I really enjoyed building this tiny house. It was a great experience. Would I build another tiny house? Probably not. Like I would never build another tiny house on wheels. Specifically because we don't need another tiny house on wheels. We already have one. But I would never go and market myself as a tiny house builder, because it's just not something, I really enjoyed building one. I just know that one is enough for me. So if your focus or your desire is just to live in a tiny house, then focus on accumulating the resources, aka money, in order to have one just basically built for you. And if you do have a little bit of a DIY attitude and you want to do some of it, but maybe not necessarily all of it, then I would certainly go with a shell. And if you're like me and you're just like, I want to build this thing myself, I don't care how much time it takes or whatever, or how physically demanding it is, I just really want to build it myself. And I really think that you should go and fulfill that desire. Just make sure that if you're not aware of how to do it, go learn how to do it. And speak to people who've done it before. There's lots of books, like tiny house books, where they kind of basically walk you through it a little bit in a loose way. I also watch the YouTube channel called Tiny Nest, and I watch their videos a couple of times. I watch all their videos a couple of times. You could watch all the videos on this channel specifically about the tiny house build, and that's going to give you a lot of great information as well. And hopefully through those videos on tininess and on this channel here, it's going to give you that confidence that you can really do this yourself. Now, if you're like, all right, I want to do this, I want to get a tiny house trailer, or I want to get a shell built, where do I go? Who do I talk to? So I definitely recommend getting in touch with Josh and Shelly from Tiny House Basics. Some of you may not know this, but I actually was in contact with Josh while I was actually picking out a trailer. So I was looking at my different trailer options in terms of buying it locally or buying it from out of state and having the trailer shipped in. So I naturally just asked him a lot of questions, and he gave a lot of very helpful answers. And so I've had that kind of relationship with him for a while, and I've been following them on Instagram. And so they've basically created like a really cool business. And what they do is they just help people like you either get a tiny house trailer or get a tiny house shell. So if you want to take the plunge into a big endeavor like building a tiny house or having a shell built, definitely get in contact with people who actually know what they're doing. So I'm an all right resource, but there are better resources out there. And specifically, Josh and Shelly, they've been living in a tiny house for a number of years, and they've also helped a lot of people build their own tiny house, either by providing a trailer or by providing a shell. Trailers specifically for tiny houses are different than regular trailers that you'd go to a trailer place and just buy. There's certain modifications that you want on the trailer, and there's different little add-ons or options that you can get with a tiny house trailer to make your tiny house maybe bigger in size, for example. Like you can get drop axles on a trailer in order to lower the bed of the trailer by 4 inches so that you're not going to go over the legal road limit of 10'6". Little things like that where you can gain an extra 3 or 4 inches of space in your lofts, for example. Little things like that that you might not necessarily know of. So I think it's a really good idea to partner with people who are doing what you want to do. For example, like when I built the fence, I was talking specifically with a guy who built fence for 6 years. The solar system that I've been working with on my buddy Liam, he's a mechanical engineer, but he also has a specialty in electronics. And so he's been helping me with that. And it's like, you want to get in touch with the people that can make that a lot easier. And will it be a little bit more expensive? I wouldn't really focus too much specifically if it's an extra few $100s or anything like that. Having people that are going to help you and steer you in the right direction based on their own experience is going to be invaluable, because it could save you maybe thousands of dollars, like if you make some critical mistakes. So I definitely get in touch with Josh and Shelly and just tell them that D-Man sent you. But to answer the question once more, should you build your own tiny house? It depends on you and your desires and what is important to you. If it's just important for you to live in a tiny house, then outsource it and just focus on accumulating the resources and the money in order to pay for it. If you're much more focused on DIY, you still have to have the money, but you're not going to be spending as much money. But the thing is, you're going to be trading time for money. So you're going to be spending a lot more time working on the tiny house. But at the same time, it's also a very enriching experience as well. So it really just kind of comes down to what's important to you, and that's really it. Awesome. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the box below, and I'll catch you on the next video. Talk to you soon. Peace.